God is there with us. He's there in the good times when everything is amazing. He's there in the dark times. I want to open up today. We're in our last sermon in this series, God's Playlist for the Road. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we always open up with an illustration. And we talked about sleep earlier. If you were here before church started, Tyler was up here doing Connect and Share, which is always a lot of fun. And he talked about sleep and sleep statistics and how much do you sleep? How much do you sleep? Do you get a lot of sleep? Did you get a lot of sleep this week? I don't know. This week was school started this week, right? Oh man, that was crazy. Okay, so this week and the last little while, I've had a number of nightmares. Everybody say, oh, I'm sorry, Pastor Isaac. That's so sad. I've had some nightmares. When I was a kid, actually, I had a recurring nightmare. Has anybody ever had a recurring nightmare? Man, those are rough. And the thing about a nightmare is it's one of those things that keeps you from sleeping, for sure. Sometimes it keeps you asleep, but then when you wake up from it, it's very hard to get back to sleep. The thing about a nightmare is you can often describe it, but what you describe seems kind of silly in the daylight, doesn't it? It almost seems like that couldn't have been nearly as terrifying as it was, but when you're in it, when you are in it, it is the most terrifying thing maybe that there is. My nightmare when I was a kid, this actually dates me a little bit. My nightmare when I was a kid was all about global thermonuclear war. Did anybody ever have nightmares about global thermonuclear war? Yeah. Or do you remember, those of you who are maybe a little bit older, remember just the fear that surrounded this in the Cold War era? The whole world was terrified that we were all going to die suddenly from global thermonuclear war. And isn't it funny how the media can spin us up, right? Because nothing really has changed all that much. There's still just as many, even more countries now that have nuclear weapons. It's probably a greater likelihood now. I don't know. But we don't really think about it anymore. Now we're just like, oh, global thermonuclear war, no big deal, I guess. Anyway, this is an image from Oppenheimer. Anybody seen Oppenheimer? I haven't yet. But this was a terrifying thing. So I would have this nightmare. It recurred. I was really little. And it was actually more like a cartoon than this image, my nightmare. And that's why it seems like it's not a scary thing unless you're in it, right? It was sort of like an American Eagle cartoon character riding on a nuclear weapon. And this would come into this field where there were some flowers. And I knew that the world was about to end. I knew I was about to die in the dream. And it was just utterly terrifying to me. I would wake up screaming. And what would I do you think, when I was a little kid when this would happen? What do you think my go-to move was? Yeah, I screamed for my mom. And I remember I was actually too short to reach the doorknob in my room at that time. I was little. I was probably like 2 or 3. And so I would run to my door. I would stick my fingers under the door, and I would just scream for my mom. Okay? This is an illustration, actually, of what we're still supposed to do in some ways. Maybe not your mom. What do I have? I told you I had nightmares this week. Anybody had recent nightmares? What are my nightmares about these days? Well, mostly this. That's mostly what my nightmares are about. I won't go into details about my nightmares these days. Okay, but that is a nightmare. Oh my, Lord have mercy. Okay, so what keeps you awake at night? Besides nightmares, there are a number of things, and we'll just use all of this as our illustration today. Here are some of the top things. If you go out there searching for what keeps people awake at night, here's what it is, okay? Stress, pain, money, and relationships. Those are the things that by far the most often when we are tossing and turning, we can't sleep, the things that our nightmares are about. Stress, just overall stress, I guess. But the number one stressor is actually financial. A number of different studies have shown this. And so notice money is actually a form of stress. So it appears on here twice, sort of in a hidden way. Money keeps more people awake at night than anything else. The next after that is physical pain, like you have some sort of illness, or you are physically in pain, or you have some sort of clinical insomnia. That's the next thing. And of course, that makes sense, right? If you're in physical pain, it's hard to sleep. But notice how little of this is actually physical. That's the number 2, but stress is number 1, then money, and then relationships. So we are often kept awake at night, tossing and turning by what other people did to us, what other people think about us, what other people might do to us. All those loneliness, isolation is a huge factor in this. These are the things that keep us awake at night. So our message today is going to be on Psalm 4. And Psalm 4, I'm not 100% certain about this, but I'm 100% certain. It was written by King David when he couldn't sleep one night. And it is about, in some ways, it is about how to sleep when you can't sleep. So God's Playlist for the Road, this is the series we've been in all summer. And next week, we're going to actually jump into a new series of messages, and I'll tell you about that. I'm very excited for that as well. This has been a great series, God's Playlist for the Road, Psalms to take with you. We've been encouraging you to take a psalm with you. So psalms are the worship songs of the ancient Israelites. And we don't have the music anymore because we wouldn't understand the music if we did. But we still have the lyrics. We have the words of these psalms, and they are powerful. One young person in our church said to me this week after they had been looking at a particular psalm and heard several of these sermons over the summer, they said to me, I think the Psalms are always going to be my favorite part of the Bible. Amen. Not that necessarily it is your favorite of all. There's a lot of good stuff in the Bible, and hopefully in the next series you're going to say, wow, the Gospel of Luke is my favorite part of the Bible. I hope that happens in every sermon series. But the Psalms are a powerful thing that we're supposed to keep with us all the time. Unlike some of the other parts of the Bible, which really are intended more to be, we study this for a while and gain something that we need to grow for that moment and that period of time, and then we come back to it later. The Psalms are intended to be with us all the time. So hopefully you have some of them with you and you decided to maybe memorize one or read it a bunch of times till you really know it. If you have not done that yet with Psalm number 23, I'm just telling you as your pastor, do that. It will change your life, actually. All these Psalms will, but hopefully one of them has resonated with you. So today we're going to wrap up the series. Last week we did Psalm 150, which is the very last psalm in the whole book of Psalms. And it was all about worshiping the Lord, praising His name. And you might think that would be the one to wrap up the series with. I really wanted to wrap up with this one that we're going to do today, Psalm 4, because Psalm 4 is all about trying to sleep in a messed up world. And so in some ways, it's sort of the sunset, the evening psalm that closes out our series as we kind of wrap up the summer now that we're into school mode and we're looking forward to the fall. How do you fall asleep in a messed up world? How did David do it? All right, so first I'm going to read Psalm 4, and then we're just going to go through 2 verses at a time. It's not very long, so we'll read it, and then we'll go through and just talk about what each of these sections means and what's happening in these sections. This is a Psalm of David, and so it begins. This is actually not part of the Psalm, but this is an inscription that was put above the Psalm later on in ancient times for the director of music with stringed instruments. So this psalm is going to be accompanied by the guitar, or I guess they didn't have guitar. Did they have guitars in those days, Pastor Jason? They had lyres, yeah. And it doesn't mean someone who lies a bunch, but it means L-Y-R-E. And that's what David played, right? Interesting that this psalm in particular, what did I say earlier that I'm convinced he wrote it when? When he couldn't sleep. What do you think was in his room? His lyre. Notice that this psalm is meant to go just with the lyre. That's not conclusive that he wrote it when he couldn't sleep, but I think so. There's no instruments that he didn't play that are needed for this. A psalm of David. Here's how it goes. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. Have you ever felt like that when you can't sleep? Give me relief from my distress. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? He's thinking about other people. What keeps us from sleeping? Relationships. Know that the Lord has set apart His faithful servant for Himself. The Lord hears when I call to Him. In your anger, do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Selah. Selah means just stop and think about it. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. Many are asking, who can show us any good? Let the light of your face shine on us, O Lord. You have filled my heart with greater joy than when their grain and new wine abound. I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. That's the end of the psalm. Do you see why I think he wrote it when he couldn't sleep on his bed? There's so many reasons in this psalm. I mean, think about how many times you have done this. You've been tossing and turning, you couldn't sleep, you tried to do something, maybe you prayed even or did something else, read a book, and then you laid down and you kind of made a declaration to yourself. Now I'm going to be able to lie down and sleep. Now I'm going to be able to take that thing that was stressing me out and set it aside. That's exactly what David is doing right here as he ends the psalm. I'm going to lie back down and sleep. Okay, let's go through it a couple of verses at a time and see what we can draw out of this. Of course, remember, with all of these, the power comes from the Psalms. It comes not from analyzing them, which is what we're mostly doing in a sermon. There is some power in that, and it helps us to enter into it more fully. But the power comes from actually using it. Just like the power from the songs on your playlist, your Spotify playlist or whatever it is, the power comes when you're listening to those songs regularly. Maybe in the car or when you're doing the dishes or whatever you're doing, you're listening to those. That's where the power comes in these Psalms as well. Okay, so it begins, the first couple of verses, we already read it, it begins with a cry for help and for relief. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. This is part of the reason I think David is unable to sleep at this moment. And we'll see in a minute, we already said it once, there's several reasons that he can't sleep, I think. But of course, this is how we feel. But also here, notice what he is doing. There's several lessons we can take here. Just like when I was a little kid, the appropriate thing for me to do when I can't sleep, when I'm terrified by my nightmare, is what? We already said it. It's to cry for my mom, right? It's to cry out for help because I am dealing with something in that moment that I cannot manage on my own. We have to be humble enough to admit before God, and most of us here have, that we cannot manage our own lives, our relationships with other people, our own emotions. We cannot manage all of those on our own. And so in those moments when you can't sleep, you're tossing and turning, or maybe it's just that represents the big thing in your life that you're dealing with right now. That big thing that's got you stressed out all the time. That big thing that it just seems no matter how many times you hit your head against it, it won't go away. We need to cry out to God in those moments. That's going to seem like a little bit of an obvious thing, I guess, but the question is, do we do it? There's a moment, Tyler said earlier, this is actually a powerful thing. Tyler said earlier, studies on sleep, they show that we should do one particular thing when we can't sleep. Most of us, when we can't sleep, we keep on lying there. This is what I do most of the time because it's hard to get up out of bed, isn't it? And it seems counterintuitive that I would want to get up out of bed when I can't sleep. I want to fall asleep. And I'm actually stressed about what time is it, and it's getting later and I'm not going to get enough sleep, and I want to get to sleep faster. But studies show that the right thing to do is what? It's actually to get out of bed and go do something else for a little bit. Not get on your phone and play a game, because the light apparently messes you up. But actually go do something else. And there's that moment, I have that moment regularly. I mean, it's not like every week, but pretty often, where I can't sleep for some reason, and I know what I should do. I know that for me, what I should do is I should get up, I should go to a particular spot in my house, and I should kneel down in prayer and really spend some time seeking God. I know that that's what I should do. How often do you think I do it? How often do you think I get up out of my bed and actually go do that? I convince myself of, oh no, it's actually, I can just pray right here in my bed. And I can. It's warm here under my blankets. I know I should get up and do something about it, but I don't want to. And usually I stay in bed. So one of the things we can take from this is we need to call out to God in our distress. This is the message of the Psalms, the message of the Bible over and over again. Seek the Lord. Seek Him. Go look for Him. Reach out to Him. Try to find Him. And that's a very simple thing to say, something we say all the time. But the question is, are we doing it? Especially in those times when we're in distress. Or do we just sit there passively and let the distress stay? That's the question. All right. So that's the first piece, this cry for help and relief that comes in the beginning of the psalm. Let's move into the next two verses. In the next two verses, as I mentioned before, he shows us that he is stressed, and what he's stressed about is other people in this situation. At least that's one of the things he's stressed about. He actually mentions money later on, as we saw in our offering time earlier. So the big things that we talked about earlier that people can't sleep, that cause people not to sleep, stress, just generalized stress, money, and relationships, as well as physical pain, of course. I don't think David is in physical pain right now. We don't see that. But he's got all of those things going on in this psalm. Has the world really changed in the last 3,500 years, 3,000 years? It has, but in some fundamental ways, human life is exactly the same as it was. It's really not that different. So he's stressed about people. Okay, so here we go. So he says, how long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. What is he saying here? He is saying something that many of us who believe the Bible, maybe you've grown up in church and you have watched as you have tried to seek after God, to follow him, you have watched as the culture and the people around you have turned further and further away from God. Say yes if that's true as you've gone through your life. You've watched the culture and even people you know sometimes. This might be just generally the people of Jerusalem, the people of Israel who are turning away from God. Even though David is trying desperately to follow God and to get the nation to follow him. This might be particular people that he knows. How many times in your life have you seen a particular person go the wrong way? And you know that they're going the wrong way, and you know what the end of it is going to be. I'll tell you another time maybe, but I just had a situation in my extended family. It's this exact same thing. For years, seeing someone go the wrong way and actually believe things that are total lies. Lies about themselves, lies about the world, lies about what life really is. And because of those things, it's destroying them and it's destroying the people around them. And they keep on going that way. And it seems like no matter what you do, you can't get them to turn or to see what should be obvious to them. That God is real, that he loves them, that he will forgive them and take them into a good place if they would just seek him. And so David is crying out. Maybe people are against him in this moment. Maybe it's just that he is really, really sad that people are destroying their own lives. The nation is going the wrong way. How long, Surrey and Delta, will you turn the glory of God into shame? How long are you going to love delusions? It's not just that they're caught in a delusion. Most of us who believe big lies, big things that are not true about life itself, believe those things because we want to. Because those things are tempting. And it seems to make life easier. This is what the Bible calls actually idolatry. It's the core of idolatry, seeking false gods, making things the center that are not really God. So David then reminds himself, I think in this section what he's doing is he begins to talk to himself. Do you ever talk to yourself when you can't sleep? Come on, admit it. How many of you do? Some people probably don't, but I certainly do. I talk to myself. I talk to God too, but I also say, come on. Come on. Remember what's true here and get this worry out of your mind. Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call on him. I believe that God is actually with me because of what Jesus did for me on the cross. God has mercy and pours grace into my life. I have to remember that in that moment of darkness and worry. I have to remind myself of it. And then I have to say, and the Lord is going to answer my prayer. Isaac, you need to get up out of bed and go seek God and pray. Even if it doesn't seem like something is happening in that moment, you know what's really true, Isaac. You know that God is going to answer you when you call out to him. This next section is amazing. Part of the reason David can't sleep at this time is that he is really angry. He's not just distressed by these people who are turning the glory of God into shame or by things that are happening in his life, things that God has allowed. He is mad about it. Have you ever not been able to sleep because you were mad? You don't need to answer. You don't need to answer. This has been, anger actually has been one of the bigger struggles in my life, personally. And the powerful message of the Bible, so there's kind of two reactions that human beings can have toward anger, or two sort of strategies we can have toward anger. And we see these both in our culture and around the world. One strategy is, my anger means I'm right, and so I need to just give into my anger full force. I need to unleash my anger on other people and use it to make them change because they're bad. Does that strategy work? No, that strategy is awful. That's what leads to wars, and that's what leads to unending feuds and destruction in life. But the other strategy is actually just as bad. The other really common strategy is anger is bad. I'm just going to pretend like I don't have it. I'm just going to take, when I have those angry feelings, I know that anger can lead to all sorts of bad stuff, so I'm just going to stuff it. That leads to all sorts of mental health issues, let's just say that. All sorts of spiritual problems, all sorts of relationships that are broken, and maybe you don't even know why they're broken because we didn't deal with things that are there. But the Bible's message about anger consistently is very different than either of those strategies. This is the Bible's message about anger. In your anger, do not sin. And in fact, in the Hebrew, this says, this is a command. It's in the imperative form, be angry and don't sin. The Bible is not against anger. Anger is just a natural human response to something that's not the way I want it to be. When something happens that's really different than what I had my heart set on or the way I think things should be, anger is a natural response. There's different degrees of it. It might just be, we might call the lower degrees like annoyance or being frustrated, and the higher degrees being angry or being really mad. This is a natural human response. So no emotion that you have is sin in itself. What sin is what you do with those emotions, right? So in your anger, do not sin. So what should you do instead? When you're on your beds, and I think David is on his bed right at this moment, search your hearts and be silent. He's going to actually dig into these things. Why am I angry? What am I not, and if I'm stuck in anger, what am I not believing that I need to believe? What am I believing that's a lie? Instead of just thinking about how bad these bad people are, David actually turns his attention inward. He says, instead of thinking about how bad they are and ramping myself up, I'm going to start to search out myself. The only thing I can really control to any significant degree is right here. I can't control all this. So I'm going to focus here. And I'm going to try and become more and more what I should be on the inside. I'm going to actually deal with my anger. Think about why I have it. And think about what's true about God. And notice he says at the end of this line, Selah. Stop. Think. Consider. Powerful. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. I think this line is, it might be something about the actual temple. That's how most people take it, but I don't think so. I think he's talking about something inward, right? That is a sacrifice. Instead of just giving vent to his anger or blaming it all on the other people, he is offering himself to God and saying, God, change me. These are the sacrifices of the righteous. This is Ephesians 4, the one verse I'll kind of connect this psalm with. And in Ephesians 4, Paul actually quotes this exact line. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Interestingly, in Psalm 4, David is talking about, who is David angry at? We've already said. All his enemies, people who believe delusions and seek false gods, right? You might think that's maybe people who are, not even Israelites, but I don't think so. I think it's the people who are right around him, who look like they're worshiping God. Because in Ephesians, does anybody know who is Paul talking about when he says these things? Other people in church. That's who Paul is talking about. This is how you need to make sure that you deal with other people in church, other believers. In your anger, do not sin. What? You're going to be angry at people in church? Yeah, maybe. Might happen. Okay. Next section. Who can show us anything good? And I think this piece connects so well with today. I mean, how often have you heard people say or felt like things are so much worse now than they've ever been? The world's probably about to end, right? Like it's almost the apocalypse. It must be here right now. Now, it might be, okay? Jesus might return at any time. The world might end. But look at how things were in the time of David. Many people are asking, who can show us anything good? Many people in the time of David, 3,000 years ago, they're saying everything is awful. It seems like the world couldn't possibly get any worse. In fact, no one even can show us one good thing in the whole world. Doesn't that sound just like many people talk today? Here's David's response. Let the light of your face shine upon us, Lord. This continues. He continues the same pattern he's already had in the psalm, where he is frustrated by something. He is stuck on something. Maybe this is, we'll see in just a minute, he's going to talk about what they have, like their physical provisions. Do they have money? Do they have grain and new wine? We read the verse in the offering that we'll read in just a minute. So maybe he's thinking here, there's just not enough food in the city. Things are so terrible right now. We've had all these wars, and the economy is just collapsing. How many people right now are worried about the economy collapsing? It's almost all you see in the news. It's half of what you see. David, though, turns himself away from that. It's not that that is totally unimportant, but it's not the core. David, as he's worried about whatever he's worried about in the middle of the night, he turns his heart and his mind back to the truth. Hey, the truth is this. If I'm just with God, then everything else is okay. If I'm just deeply connected with Him, the God that I worship, the God who made me and who made the world, is actually the kind of God who wants to be with me face to face like a friend. And if I'm with Him in that way, everything else just fades to the background. It's no big deal. Even if everything's collapsing, we saw that in one of the Psalms earlier. Even if the mountains are falling into the ocean, it's no big deal if we're with God. Really, because He made it all. And many of you have known this in times of worship, in times when God has done some huge thing in your life. In the moment where you came to Christ, you experienced His presence and everything else fades away. All the other troubles and worries are not a big deal. So what David does is he turns himself to seek God's face. This is a biblical image that describes just, I want to get real with God. I want to be close to Him. We come to church, and what we're supposed to be doing here is reaching out to God Himself from deep in our hearts. Are you doing it when you're here? Or are you focused? Sometimes we get focused on all the stuff that's around Him and that's supposed to be pointing us to Him. But we're not sometimes focused on God Himself. So David turns his attention. Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. And then he says this, you have filled my heart with greater joy than when their grain and new wine abound. This is the verse we looked at for the offering. And what he's saying here is the joy that comes from God. He's saying just what I've said already. The joy that comes from God is far beyond any joy that we could get from just the things of this life. It really is. If you have not experienced it, you don't know yet. But as soon as you do, you know. I mean, I think of Talon's here today, and I keep thinking about his testimony, his God story from when he was baptized, and how he experienced the presence of God in that moment at Momentum, and it's better than anything else. He really is life itself. He's better than life. He's certainly better than this life. You've filled my heart with greater joy than when their grain and new wine abound. Even if I don't have any money, right? How do you feel when you have a whole bunch of money stocked away, or if you get a bunch of money maybe that you didn't even expect? That does fill us with joy, right? It does me, I'll admit it. If I get money that I didn't expect, it feels really good. The joy of the Lord is far better than that. And he chooses that joy over trying to rely on the joy that comes from anything else. When you are having trouble sleeping at night, when you are worried and you're tossing and turning and you can't get that thing out of your mind, maybe you're angry, what do you turn to? Do you turn to other things to just distract you? Do you maybe try to think about things that make you happy, some of these smaller things? Or do you turn directly to the joy of the Lord? Do you seek him? It's harder to do, I admit. Joy from God is better than having a bunch of money. That's the way I decided to put that today. Having a bunch of money would be cool in some ways, but joy from God is far better. Finally, he ends the psalm with a line that just has, ever since when I became a believer and I first heard this line, I don't know if I read it or if someone read it in church, I'm not sure, but ever since I first heard this line, it has stuck with me. It has echoed in my brain, in my mind, over and over again. I don't even know how to express just the why or the love that I have for this line, but I do, and I hope that you will love it as well. I will lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. I will lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. I'll just make two observations about this line. Number one, it's a declaration. It's David choosing something. He is deciding. He got up when he couldn't sleep. He got up and what did he do? He grabbed his guitar and he went and wrote a song. And that's the song we're talking about today. And after he sought God with his music, which was one of the gifts that he had, he sought God, he prayed, he cried out to God. Then he went back to his bed and he declared, he chose, he made a decision. I'm going to lie down and I'm going to sleep in peace because of the Lord. Because I know he's here with me. And all that other stuff doesn't really matter. And the second thing, why? Why is it that only the Lord makes us dwell in safety? I'm going to say it like this. The word dwell means to live, right? It just means to live somewhere. Only the Lord makes us live in safety because his joy and his presence last. Everything else that might make us feel safe, this is once again the message of the Bible over and over. Everything else that makes us feel safe or happy or secure is completely temporary. It is only here for a moment, even if that moment is a couple of decades. It's only temporary. It's only the Lord who can make us live permanently in safety. The Lord alone. Let me read it for us, and we'll close the message just by hearing the psalm one more time. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Selah. Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. In your anger, do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Selah. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. Many are asking, who can show us anything good? Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. For you have filled my heart with greater joy than when their grain and new wine abound. Therefore, I will lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Let's pray.